The Pro Wrestle Machine is back with another installment. Continuing on with 1997 from Uncle Dave's. Let's jump into this one. March 24, 1997 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. March 24, 1997 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Future of MMA takes turn for the worst with pay-per-view censorship. Steve Williams arrested. WCW publicity coup with Dennis Rodman. Tons more. By Observer staff. The future of the Ultimate Fighting Championships, Extreme Fighting Championships and the success of the upcoming Extreme Championship Wrestling pay-per-view shows all took turns for the worst over this past week due to what basically amounts to a controversial issue of cable system pay-per-view censorship. The NHB industry took a major hit this past week with the announcement that Telecommunications Incorporated TCI Cable, the largest cable chain in the country, will no longer carry the shows. The decision will not affect the upcoming EFC show on March 28th, but either that or the May 30th UFC show will likely be the last carried by TCI, as some reports are saying this decision will go into effect on June 1st. An article in the March 17th multi-channel news indicated the March 28th show would be the final one carried. UFC officials stated that it was doubtful the May 30th show would be carried by TCI, but they were still hoping. TCI systems comprise between 4 and 5 million of the remaining 20 to 21 million addressable homes that were still carrying the shows. Between addressable cable homes and satellite dish owners, there were 26.2 million homes with pay-per-view accessibility in total as of last month. Within the industry and media reports will give a higher number, but this is a realistic figure, and NHB had lost 5 to 6 million of them already when Viewers' Choice of Canada, the Cablevision systems in the US and Intermedia Partner Systems had decided to no longer carry the programming. But the TCI hit is the biggest one yet because not only is it the largest carrier, but the most influential, and there is legitimate fear this will create a domino effect that will reverberate throughout the cable industry and wind up as the fatal blow for NHB on pay-per-view. With EFC basically hanging by a thread and already being in critical financial condition leading up to the current show, it likely signals the final death knell of the promotion after the March 28th card. About the only thing that could save the promotion is a huge turnaround in the buy rate coupled with TCI changing its mind. Those close to the situation have indicated that if this decision had come down sooner, the March 28th show may have been cancelled by the promoters, even though TCI would still have carried it, largely because the idea was that this would be a show to help build an audience for the future, and now there doesn't look to be much of a future. The show is going on in Des Moines, Iowa, since much of the costs of running the show have already been incurred, so they might as well go ahead with it. UFC had taken several recent hits of late, but promoter David Isaacs of parent Semaphore Entertainment Group said that his company was in the business for the long haul. He cited a belief that it is a combination of the fallout from the controversy in New York and the hiring of a new president of TCI from San Francisco, Leo Hindry, to attempt to turn around that company's ailing financial situation that led to the recent decision. Hindry, who was named president of TCI last month by CEO John Malone, is an arch-conservative who was CEO of Intermedia Partners, the first system to decide to not carry NHB pay-per-view programming. Although Hindry had been a longtime foe of NHB, including participating in a debate at a cable conference with Semaphore Entertainment Group president Bob Merowitz, the decision hit the genre from left field. The belief of late had been that Hindry had come around to the realization the matches weren't as violent or dangerous as their political foes had made them out to be. In fact, Intermedia had changed its position a few months back regarding NHB and carried the February 7th UFC show. However, Jed Palmer, senior vice president of programming for TCI, said the decision came directly from Hindry. ECW had expressed that its product is theater and not sport to TCI to attempt to differentiate itself from the NHB genre, which it is mistakenly lumped into and painted with the same brush. Isaacs confirmed a loss of TCI systems would mean a significant change in business, but said they were in the game for the long haul and that the company's business plan was to hang on and wait until dishes gain more popularity, at which time the company won't be as dependent upon decisions made by cable companies. That could be a long ways in the future. It would be a drop of between 15 and 25% in revenue for the shows, provided buy rates stayed the same, depending upon whose stats you use, virtually all of which will work against the bottom line. This forces Semaphore Entertainment Group, which is not one of these vanity promotions with no business concept, to cut costs in order to remain financially viable. This means purses for the fighters, already a controversial issue, would have to be scaled back once again to coincide with the dropping revenue. This would make it more difficult for Semaphore Entertainment Group to bring in the top quality names. Even before the TCI losses from the previous show due to the last-minute move had caused purse cutbacks for the upcoming show, which will cause the May 30th show to not feature any kind of a championship match. The complete May 30th lineup was finalized this past week with a Vitor Belfort vs. Tank Abbott main event. The site hasn't been revealed, but inside rumors indicate Augusta, Georgia or a site near Augusta as the prime candidate. There will also be a 4-man under 200 and over 200 pound weight division tournaments. The original triple main event single match format with one tournament was dropped due to purses being scaled back, and that was among the reasons that champion Mark Coleman, Don Fry, and Marco Ruiz, all of whom had been negotiated with and appeared to be on the show at one point, won't be appearing. For the money offered, none of the potential matchups involving those three were able to be put together as Fry wanted more than what was offered to face either Coleman or Ruiz, and Coleman wanted more to face Ruiz. In addition, there were political problems in that Belfort's camp had claimed they weren't going to allow him to participate in the show if he was lower on the card than Ruiz. A secondary plan was to put Belfort and Abbott as the lead attractions in a heavyweight tournament, who he was willing to fight. But Semaphore Entertainment Group sees the 19-year-old Belfort as one of its biggest potential drawing cards and doesn't want to risk him this early against the likes of Ruiz or Coleman. The under 200 division will include Insen Inoue of Satoru Sayama's shooting promotion in Japan, who lost in 47 seconds last year to Igor Zinoviev in Japan but has extensive experience in both Vale Tudo and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournaments and a strong shooting background. Guy Mesder of Pancrase, 2-0 UFC record, Christoph Leninger, 0-1 UFC record with a loss to Ken Shamrock in UFC 3, but a U.S. nationally ranked 189-pounder in judo, and Hoyce Alger, a highly regarded amateur wrestler who is Dan Gable's assistant coach in Iowa. The tournament winner theoretically will face Jerry Bolander to determine the first under 200 UFC champion in July. Although it is against the rules of Lion's Den to allow Lion's Den fighters to fight each other, both Ken and Bob Shamrock waived the rule at the request of Mesder as Semaphore Entertainment Group wasn't going to allow him in the tournament if he wouldn't agree to fight Bolander should he win. The heavyweight tournament lineup includes NHB veteran David Beneteau, 2-3 UFC record, 4-4 overall, and 300-pound pro wrestler Tony Halme, Ludwig Borga in WWF, who was a boxer in Finland many years ago and is currently training under Jean Labelle for NHB competition. Halme is best known as a fighter in wrestling circles for a 3-punch knockout of Scott Norton in a Japanese bar years ago when both were regulars with New Japan Pro Wrestling, although there are reports it was a sucker punch knockout. The other confirmed entrant is Steve Graham, who all we know about is that he's big and strong. However, for the top quality names to work in the United States, Semaphore Entertainment Group may wind up being the only place to go because if EFC is gone, the remaining competition is largely of the fly-by-night variety with fighters having no capability of making a serious name outside of the most hardcore of fans. ECW, which went in with only an estimated 16 million homes cleared due to viewers' choice deciding not to carry its April 13th pay-per-view because of a combination of perceived violent content and what it considered an unacceptable storyline, the Tyler Fullington angle, which ECW has since dropped, took another hit from Cablevision Systems Corporation, which is strongest in the Northeast, particularly in theoretical ECW strongholds such as Connecticut, Boston, and Long Island. Exactly how many homes this entails isn't clear because some of the Cablevision systems were already not carrying the events due to relying on viewers' choice for their pay-per-view channels. This comes on the heels of a few intermedia systems that use Request as its pay-per-view carrier, including Nashville, Tennessee, also deciding not to air the ECW pay-per-view. Although NHB and ECW are two entirely different animals, one being a somewhat dangerous and sometimes brutal sport, although both aspects are highly exaggerated by its opponents and in the media, the other being a sometimes violent and dangerous form of theater, the censorship issues involving both are similar. While cable companies are publicly owned businesses that due to that fact should have the right to make decisions on what they will and won't carry, they are somewhat unique, like the power companies, in that they are basic monopolies within their franchise area. Consumers don't have a choice if they don't agree with the decisions of their cable company to switch to another company. Their only choice is to switch to buying a satellite dishes. However, the inconsistencies in regard to both animals and the attempts to eliminate them from pay-per-view raises serious questions. Unlike over-the-air television, pay-per-view is something consumers have to subscribe to. The argument that these shows are harmful to children is somewhat questionable in that they have to be specifically ordered and paid for, no different from the adult movies that most of the systems that are banning these programs still air. In addition, to single these out creates some terrible inconsistencies because movies with themes far more controversial than any ECW angle or violent content that makes ECW look pale by comparison aren't singled out. In addition, numerous Cablevision systems that won't air ECW on pay-per-view do air ECW on broadcast television, some in decent time slots. We have yet to hear of a cable system blacking out individual programs of any type on stations due to perceived content, let alone ECW, yet the same product on pay-per-view which consumers have to subscribe to rather than children can witness simply by channel surfing, is being blacked out. Even though ECW with all the high-risk stunts and more frequent stiff shots is more dangerous than WWF or WCW wrestling, both of the latter promotions contain most of the same types of content as ECW, just in smaller doses. In addition, is there any call to ban movies in which stuntmen, who on occasion suffer very serious injuries, attempt things far more dangerous than anything done on an ECW show? The inconsistencies in regard to violence and danger involving UFC have been stated here numerous times. While networks can show pro boxing, which has a much higher injury and mortality rate, or auto racing, which regularly produces deaths on weekend mornings and afternoons, UFC, which for the most part isn't available on broadcast television, is being banned by cable companies. The irony is that the November Mars pay-per-view show was later sold to Mexican television and then broadcast on a Saturday afternoon on an over-the-air Spanish-language network nationally in the U.S. and was the source of no censorship or even controversy. Steve Williams, the top American star of All Japan Pro Wrestling who also works for ECW and was involved in serious negotiations with the World Wrestling Federation over the past week, was arrested on the morning of March 17 at the Laredo, Texas International Airport on drug possession charges. Williams was caught for at least a third time in his pro wrestling career coming through airports with drugs. In this case, inspectors found undeclared pharmaceutical drugs inside luggage belonging to Williams and two traveling companions who were not involved in pro wrestling. The three were charged with a felony possession of a controlled substance and were released from Webb County Jail after posting $25,000 bond each. Drugs seized included 80 boxes of Neopercodan, 17 boxes of Valium, 16 boxes of Halcyon, 15 boxes of Tamegesic, 26 boxes of Darvon, and 8 boxes of Ritrivil. The drugs are all painkiller type drugs, most of which are very popular today with more pro wrestlers than you'd think, for obvious and not so obvious reasons. Laredo is a city just across from the Mexican border. The story ran on the AP wire and was carried in numerous newspapers around the country. While we haven't received any official word of this, one would think it would be very likely that this arrest would at least temporarily kill the WWF's current interest in bringing him in. We say temporarily since WWF brought Crush back more than 1 year after his arrest on steroid and weapons charges and actually used that arrest as part of his angle. The general belief is that Williams was being brought in as a potential opponent for Ken Shamrock. It is also unclear how this will affect his position with All Japan, but the arrest received significant play in Japan as well, since Williams is the third most popular foreign wrestler in the country. The WWF already signed Del Wilkes, another of All Japan's top foreign stars, who is better known as the Patriot, to a multi-year contract. Wilkes was last week voted in Weekly Pro Wrestling magazine as the fifth most popular foreign wrestler in the country, is believed to have signed sometime within the past 10 days. He hadn't worked All Japan since the December Tag Team Tournament, where he was the partner of Kenta Kobashi due to an injury, but apparently during his recuperation had decided to explore the WWF option, and the two sides had on-again off-again talks for at least a month or two. Those close to Williams believe it was most likely that he would be signing with Titan, which has been after him on and off for the past 2 years, but that was all before the arrest, and there is no word on how or if the situation in regard to Titan's interest in him will change or how this would affect his status with All Japan, where he was scheduled to return for the Champion Carnival Tour, which no doubt he would play a major role in, beginning March 22. The news of Williams' arrest will almost surely be carried in a somewhat prominent role in many sports sections in Japan on March 19, and at press time we do know that All Japan was very concerned with both the story itself and the press reaction to the story in Japan. If he were to not be able to appear on this tour, it would require a major redoing of all the bookings since these tours are very carefully planned. The situation with Williams, who turns 37 in May, negotiating seriously with Titan, points out a major shift and change in the wrestling structure over the past few years. The job Williams and the other American regulars had with All Japan as recently as a few years ago was considered one of the most plum positions in the entire industry. The money was very good. You had basically 24 to 30 weeks a year off. There was far less political BS, as in the States. Job security was considered much better than in the US, where positions change rapidly every time the wind changes. The situation was favorable since it was an athletic environment with virtually no gimmicks or screwiness involved. The funny thing is that All Japan really hasn't changed all that much, but the industry as a whole has changed greatly. Both WWF and WCW offer guaranteed contracts which both pay for injuries suffered on the job, and wrestlers are paid when injured. The level of pay is equal to or better than All Japan in regard to the talent they are wooing. The travel schedules in each company is not nearly as demanding as had been the case in the past. That, coupled with lesser physical demands in the US and the bonus of not being in Japan for a month at a time, which can play serious mental games, you can see why All Japan, which hasn't changed its salary structure or how it treats foreign talent while the market has changed, is rapidly losing much of its talent base. Wilkes follows in the heels of Phil LaFawn, formerly Dan Crawford, and Doug Furness as All Japan regulars who have left the promotion in recent years. But it would be the loss of Williams that would be the most damaging. Williams has been positioned as All Japan's top foreign star since his return to the company 1 year ago and held that position before a year-long suspension as well. While Stan Hansen has more name recognition, it is well established Hansen is long past his prime and exists largely on 2 decades of name identity and is no longer featured regularly on top as a single. Williams had a well-known reputation at the University of Oklahoma as a college football and 4-time NCAA place winner heavyweight college wrestling star. He handed Dan Severn his only pinfall defeat in 4 years of college competition in 1981 and lost a close decision as a senior to Bruce Baumgartner in the NCAA tournament finals in 1982 before going to work for Bill Watts Mid-South Wrestling. He was regarded in many circles as arguably, Meng was generally the other person with that rep, the single toughest person legitimately in the pro wrestling business for many years. He eventually migrated to New Japan and switched over to All Japan for a famous run as tag team partner of Terry Gordy. He eventually worked his way up the All Japan ladder both from a work rate and position standpoint to where he was considered one of the best performers in the world in 1994, and the premier American wrestler in the All Japan style. His rise, and for a short while his career, came to a halt after being banned from going to Japan in March of 1995 when he was caught at customs with a small amount of marijuana. He had a previous offense in the United States in 1988 when on a Japanese trip. At the Detroit airport he was caught carrying controlled substances including steroids and cocaine, which nearly cost him his job with Jim Crockett Promotions. Williams showed surprising loyalty to Giant Baba after the 1995 problem, by turning down WWF offers and working very few independent dates over that year, and waiting until he could return to Japan. The feeling is Baba had to pull major strings, and it showed just how powerful Baba really was in getting Williams back in 1 year, since Paul McCartney for a similar offense wasn't allowed back in Japan for more than a decade. He returned and performed better than just about anyone could have expected, going from a 1-year layoff right into such high level of competition at last year's Champion Carnival. But as the months in Japan went by, his work wasn't the same. Even so, his June 7, 1996 match at Budokan Hall teaming with Johnny Ace in a loss to Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama was voted the Observer's 1996 Match of the Year. In addition, his Champion Carnival final match lost to Akira Tao, and the later match where he and Ace won the belts from Misawa and Akiyama were close to that level. However, the first 2 tours of 1997 appeared to show a noticeable decline in his work, and he really didn't get over in ECW, where he's made several appearances between Japan tours. Given his age and the physically demanding style of All Japan, it really is the right time for him to make a move if he ever would want to try WWF, although this last-minute snafu could throw a red flag on those plans. The negotiations aspect of the story is actually bigger in regard to All Japan than WWF, although Williams would get at least the chance to reach a level of American stardom that he never quite reached in the past by going to WWF. The jury is out on whether, if he makes the move, that from a WWF standpoint it isn't 2 years too late. Either way, it is largely expected Williams will work the upcoming Champion Carnival Tour for All Japan even if he signs with the WWF, but after that is unknown. As far as All Japan, by failing to keep pace with what is offered elsewhere, it is in danger of turning into the AWA of the 90s. All Japan was progressive at one point in regard to offering good money and regular positions with its talent. Just a few years ago, All Japan was different from just about any company in the world in that the talent did nothing but rave about the company, were thrilled to be there, and praise their boss, with only the minimal grumbling that are inherent in a company of top athletes as part of a business where winners, losers and your position in the promotion are decided by forces often out of the wrestler's control. But nothing has changed since that time except everything else in every other major promotion, and All Japan's policy of no insurance coverage, only paying for treatment of injuries if the wrestler gets his treatment in Japan, and not paying wrestlers for time off while recuperating from injuries, which actually was progressive at one point in the business that just ignored injured talent, is today behind the times. By relying so heavily on work rate, it has a harder time filling spots when wrestlers leave when they get better offers, particularly now when the list of available free agents in wrestling who are super workers is decidedly thin or non-existent. In addition, its core talent base is all, with the exception of Ken Kobashi and Jun Akiyama, in its mid to late 30s, and the physical style has taken its toll on every key member of the company. While the company survived quite well in 1995 without Williams, losing him at this point, even if his work isn't at the same level, would be more damaging because Hansen is 2 years older, and it would leave Gary Albright as the only foreigner who could headline as a single, as it's questionable whether Johnny Ace could draw as a single in a top spot. Dennis Rodman's first major foray into the world of pro wrestling turned into something of a publicity coup for World Championship Wrestling, probably more important than the otherwise forgettable pay-per-view show that he debuted on. WCW Uncensored was the typical WCW pay-per-view show of the past year. The lines are familiar. Good undercard. Terrible main event. Booking with more holes in it than Swiss cheese. Well, in this case, the undercard wasn't as good as most of the shows of the past year. But some of the angles were very good, actually 2 of them were excellent. The booking holes were large enough to fit the giant in some of them. And even if the show blew, and some of it did, in particular the main event, it accomplished something the best of pay-per-view shows don't. It got the company mainstream publicity. Not on the level of the first few WrestleManias, but more than anything WCW has done in its history. Some of it was embarrassing, such as the Atlanta Constitution, which ran a 9-paragraph preview to the pay-per-view show in its Sunday Sports section, complete with a Rodman photo, but in every reference, called the promotion he was working for the WWF, even to the point of saying he would be training at the WWF power plant in Atlanta, and that the WWF had a television show called Monday Nitro on TNT that was delivering good ratings. Very little of it was written in a positive manner, but what do you expect when you combine 2 well-respected institutions to the general public like pro wrestling and Rodman? But it was there, and nobody knew it better than the orchestrator, Hulk Hogan. It was Hogan's influence on Eric Bischoff that got him to match or exceed the WWF's offer to Rodman for WrestleMania. And WCW scored a major moral victory, being in the Chicago Sun-Times nearly every day promoting its pay-per-view show, while WWF had WrestleMania in the same city 1 week later. ABC Radio ran the story on its national news the next morning, well, through the 6 a.m. newscast, reporting it as Rodman wrestling and being in a tag team match with Hogan as his partner in Charleston, South Carolina that they won, and using Tony Schiavone's pay-per-view commentary of his involvement. However, most major newspapers failed to make mention of Rodman being involved in the wrestling show. Hogan made sure to surgically bind himself to Rodman's side as much as possible at the pay-per-view show, so when the horde of photographers, particularly shooting for every major sports paper in Japan, got their shots of Rodman wearing his NWO t-shirt, guess whose face is side by side. Actually, the main event seemed more of a backdrop to the real story, the NWO guys posing for photos with Rodman and everyone who has power trying to get themselves hooked up with him for photo ops, which wound up being Hogan, Randy Savage, to a lesser extent Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, and of course, Roddy Piper. It appears from media reports that Rodman's deal with WCW is that this show was the angle to build for a match on July 13th in Daytona Beach, Florida for the Bash at the Beach pay-per-view. There will only be one match, according to media reports, on the 2-show deal, unlike a 3-show deal we had speculated on last week. When the Bulls season ends, Rodman will get a few weeks of training in at the power plant so they can hopefully choreograph his match well enough to be acceptable, much as they did last summer with the debut match of Kevin Green and Steve McMichael. The only money figure running around Chicago is that Rodman received $2 million for the deal, but I'd suspect that figure is close to double what the real number is. The show largely got a mixed response, with many of the thumbs up specifically saying they thought the show was saved by the angle that ended the show, where Sting finally attacked the entire NWO, dropping them all on the back of their heads with Scorpion Death Drops, a much cooler name for the same move, and Slop Drop, including, just as the show went off the air, Hogan himself. Sting got a thunderous pop, as he should have, since they spent 6 months building up to that moment, as he soaked it in while the credits ran, and true to form of keeping their storylines consistent, the final name in the credits was the WCW Senior Vice President Eric Bischoff. You mean he really wasn't suspended in real life? Next thing you're going to tell me is that Kevin Sullivan isn't really doing Jacqueline. Uncensored on March 23rd drew 9,295, 7,640 paying $101,184. Fans to the North Charleston, South Carolina Coliseum, or 360 shy of a sellout, although there were points where the box office was closed and it was sold out for the moment until they opened more seats up. With the exception of future of the Stinger and the Worm, probably the biggest question on the minds of people who viewed the show was if I was as incompetent at my job as Dusty Rhodes is at his. How long would I last? Rhodes, whose announcing has gotten progressively worse, if that's even possible, was well past the point of unbearable. He ruins it completely for Tony Schiavone, who really appears to be trying to catch up in a rapidly changing world that Rhodes wants to single-handedly drag back to 1975. The fact that Bobby Heenan has been living off his name and reputation for the past year only makes things worse for Schiavone for having to carry 600+ pounds of dead weight through all these endless hours of television every month. And people wonder why he has a bad neck. Not that he was perfect, as he kept speculating about who WCW would get to replace Rick Steiner, and when there was nobody, it only left the audience with an empty feeling as the main event started, thinking WCW was a bunch of wimpy putzes once again. Don't even get me started on Mike Tenay, or Scott Steiner, or Rey Mysterio Jr. AI's train Harold Hogue pinned Max in the dark match. Report was that it was about as good as you'd expect. 1. Dean Malenko. Dean Simon pinned Eddie Guerrero in 1914 to win the U.S. title. Malenko was the clear-cut crowd favorite in this match, even though Guerrero was the storyline babyface. The reaction was only a minor surprise since Malenko has gotten very popular of late while Guerrero's popularity has gone down in the past year. Fans booed the hell out of Guerrero when he would do the exact same thing Malenko was cheered for doing seconds earlier. A well-constructed, very good match, although they've had better matches in the past. They tried to do a different match, with more of a grudge feel to it. While the match was going on, Rick Steiner was backstage surrounded by Kevin Nash, Scott Hall and Six as they mockingly screamed to call for help because there was an accident. Steiner was stretchered out and taken out in an ambulance. Back to the match, Guerrero worked on Malenko's knee for several minutes, doing basically spots Malenko usually does. The two then picked it up after Guerrero missed a plancha and crashed onto the guardrail. Guerrero came back quickly with a near fall after a quebradora, spinning backbreaker, a power bomb and a jackknife pin, not to be confused with a jackknife and pin. Malenko hit a power slam and Guerrero's frog splash, but lifted Guerrero up, refusing to pin him. He went for a power bomb, but Guerrero reversed it into a necktie head scissors. Malenko used a German suplex for a near fall, while Guerrero came back with a swinging DDT. Guerrero then put on Malenko's finisher, the Texas Cloverleaf. At this point Six came to ringside. Guerrero dropped the hold to argue with Six, who tried to steal the U.S. belt. In the ensuing conference, Six dropped his video camera, Malenko got it and clocked Guerrero with it to score the pin. After the match, Malenko seemingly filmed the KO'd Guerrero and left him the video camera, apparently as a consolation prize. Easily the best match on the show? It was even more impressive when you consider that Guerrero had torn his pec about 4 minutes before the finish. At press time, he hadn't been checked by a doctor. If he doesn't need surgery, he could be back in anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks, which postpones the planned Triangle feud once again. If he does need surgery, it's about a 6-month recovery period. 3 3/4 stars. Gene Okerlund interviewed Roddy Piper in The Horsemen. 2. Ultimo Dragon, Yoshihiro Osai, pinned Psicosis, Dionisio Castellanos, in 13-17. Another very good match. The two weren't 100% on, but they worked very hard. Dragon was banged up after taking a bad bump on his head on Friday night at Arena Mexico against Scorpio Jr. Tenay. That it was the first singles match between the two. I believe it was only the second, as they had a match last year in Mexicali. Psicosis did an awesome running tope over the top rope and followed with a leg drop from the ring over the top to the floor, and he seemed to hurt his knee doing the spot but ignored it a few seconds later. Dragon did a handspring elbow on the floor and followed with his Osai moonsault. While outside the ring, Psicosis went after Sonny Ono, who countered with a nice-looking kick. The spot made Psicosis look like a total fool, but WCW is known for making all but a few of its wrestlers look silly. Dragon used a moonsault for a near fall. He went for a power bomb, but there was a double reversal into another near fall and hit La Magistral for another near fall. Psicosis tried a superplex, but Dragon reversed it and Psicosis landed on his face. Psicosis did a Frankensteiner off the top rope, but Dragon cradled him off a move. As Psicosis went for a Rana, Dragon countered with a running Liger bomb. He then turned a Rana off the top rope into a DDT brainbuster, which was called the Tornado DDT, which was a great inventive spot, and got the pin with a Tiger suplex. Rhodes and Heenan basically made fun of Tenay's attempting to call all the unique spots. 3 1/2 stars. Gene Okerlund did an interview with Diamond Dallas Page. Randy Savage and Elizabeth came out on the announcer stand with a copy of the Playboy Celebrities mag that Page and wife Kimberly are in. Savage showed the shot of Kimberly with NWO spray painted over the stuff they don't want you to see on television. Kimberly then came out crying with NWO spray painted on the front of her dress. As Page was distracted, Savage jumped him and KO'd him with a spray paint cannon, spray painted NWO on his back. He then went to spray paint Kimberly's back, but Elizabeth wanted to do it instead and she spray-painted Kimberly to start up their 4-person feud. Very good angle. 3. Glacier, Ray Lloyd pinned Mortis, Chris Cluseritis, in 9:04. The two had been practicing this match literally for months at the power plant and also did the match in Germany for a tour in December. It had the look and feel of a match put together extensively and carefully in the gym by two green wrestlers. Mortis shows a lot of potential and has good size. Some of the wrestling spots were good. The martial arts spots, particularly the kicking, mainly looked slow and fake and sometimes looked good. It's hard to get over these guys as martial arts and kicking experts in a promotion with guys like best kicker in the business Dragon, 6 and Sonny Ono whose stuff looks so much better. Mortis used the old rocker dropper which Heenan said he'd never seen before. It was only the move in the biggest money pro wrestling lawsuit and biggest lawsuit judgment ever in Heenan's hometown of Tampa. Next thing you know he'll see Nick Bockwinkel or Blackjack Lanza in an angle and not recognize them. At one point Glacier came off the top rope but was caught by Mortis and a Northern Lights suplex. They had a good near fall where Glacier was about to do his cryonic kick, but Mortis put Mickey J in the way and Glacier held up, only to get nailed by a kick from Mortis. Mortis went for another kick as Glacier was held by Jimmy Vandenberg, but Glacier moved and Mortis held up. Glacier finally hit the kick for a pin. After the match, Mortis knocked Glacier out with his staff, and Vandenberg signaled for someone to come down who turned out to be Brian Clark, formerly WWF's Atom Bomb, no idea what name he'll be called here. And the two left Glacier laying 1 3/4 stars. 4. Marcus Bagwell beat Scotty Riggs, Scott on Tall, in a strap match in 12:25. They whipped the hell out of each other and Bagwell looked great from a personality standpoint. But Riggs had nothing and the match went on twice as long as it should have, so it got boring. At least they did a new finish rather than the classic strap match finish. In this, Riggs took a bad bump over the top rope and sold it like he was immobilized. Bagwell then dragged him around all 4 corners to win 1 1/4 stars. The NWO did an interview. They appeared to be pretending to be stoned. They pretend very well. In reference to Kimberly, Hall said that he thought Silicon Valley was in California. 5. Harlem Heat, Lane and Booker Huffman beat Public Enemy, Ted Petty and Mike Durham in 13-17 in a tornado match. This was an ECW-style brawl, using all sorts of objects such as a garbage can lid, toilet seat, frying pan and cookie sheet. Most of the shots were really stiff. Sherry got into the act big time as well. Johnny Grunge bled, although they never made reference to it and avoided any camera close-ups of him, but they didn't pull back as they've done in the past. It was really good early but went on about 5 minutes too long because they just continued to do the same thing over and over, and this type of match is best kept at around 8 minutes. Certainly a much better match than it appeared on paper going in. PE finally put Booker T through a table. Jeff Jarrett and Steve McMichael came out and McMichael hit Rocco with a briefcase and Booker T pinned him after a Harlem hangover, somersault leg drop. 2.5 stars. 6. Prince Iaukea, Mike Hayner, retained the WCW TV title pinning Rey Mysterio Jr., Oscar Gutierrez. By this point in the show the crowd was waiting for the main event so they had no patience for these guys. Not to make excuses because, as mentioned previously, the Iaukea underdog gimmick is totally dead and nobody cares, and they seem to have come close to succeeding in killing Mysterio Jr. by having him do too many jobs for a gimmick performer and ruining his illusion by putting him in too often with the heavyweights. There was nothing wrong with the match as far as work. They didn't tell a story, mainly did spots that didn't miss and lots of high-flying moves, but the crowd at this point wouldn't have accepted a slow builder anyway. Mike Tenay announced ahead of time that there was a 15 minutes time limit, which pretty much gave away where they were going. Mysterio Jr. did a running flip tope. Prince did a slingshot powerbomb and a springboard plancha, but it didn't matter what they did. Prince tried a crossbody off the guardrail but Mysterio Jr. moved and he crashed on the floor. As they were going back and forth for near falls, the crowd began chanting boring and in a sense the intensity fell apart, although it wasn't as if they were missing spots or physically the match fell apart. At the 11:57 mark, the bell rang signifying a 15 minutes draw. Mysterio Jr. asked for more time and Iaukea agreed. There was some cheering and some booing when they announced the restart. After a few quick spots, the boring chants came back. Mysterio Jr. went for his springboard Hurricane Rana, but Iaukea reversed it into a cradle pin at 1:44. The finish made Mysterio Jr. look real bad in that he cried for more time and still couldn't beat a guy that everyone still considers a jobber. 1 1/2 star. 7. Team NWO, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall and Randy Poffo and Terry Bollea beat Team Piper, Chris Benoit and Roderick Toombs and Jeff Jarrett and Steve McMichael, and Team WCW, Paul White and Larry Fole and Scott Reich-Steiner, in the main event in 1922. This was one of those booked on acid main events. After TV on Monday, where the whole selling point of Team Piper was Flair and Piper being side by side once again, there was no Flair and no explanation as to why. Not that anyone thought he'd wrestle, but he needed to be there, and the explanation the next night on Nitro that Flair was in Savannah dancing was pretty lame. After Piper insisting that his friends would be there to watch his back, they weren't there. Not that it would have helped things had they been there, but there was no logic to them not being there after the interview. The problem seems to be the guys doing interviews selling the shows on Monday television are on a different page than the guys putting the shows together on Sunday. After Rick Steiner was injured, it's like there isn't one wrestler in WCW to step forward. Didn't we just do that storyline in War Games? War Games storyline with Wrestle War finish, and neither of those main events were any good either. Not to mention the show being advertised as Last Man Standing and the only way to be eliminated was pinfall or submission, then sticking the over-the-top rope rule in without any advertising so quietly in the ring introductions that the announcers apparently didn't even know. At least the WWF had the tiny balls to announce its screwjob way of keeping top talent from doing jobs in its final four on the weekend of the show, so those ordering at least knew before making the call. WCW didn't even give them that courtesy. Not that anyone actually expected we'd see 11 of these guys do jobs, and anyone with a brain figured it was Battle Royal rules, but the way it was handled was classic bait and switch. And poor Scott Steiner. He gets run off the road and nearly killed. Then they sent his brother to the hospital. With revenge on his mind, when he finally gets in, he goes after Chris Benoit and Jeff Jarrett, and after doing 2 moves to Hall and Nash, gets punted over the top and walks away like a whipped dog, in the same camera shot as when Hogan and Rodman are coming down the aisle. Anyway, they started with Hall, Benoit and Giant for 5 minutes, which was the best 5 minutes of the match. At 4:55, Giant missed a charge at Hall and went over the top and was eliminated. None of the announcers recognized the elimination, and it wasn't until Michael Buffer announced it, it's really scary when he's the quickest on the draw, that any of them realized the top rope rule. Jarrett, Savage and Luger were in next. At this point they began shading time, which was just as well. McMichael, Nash and Scott Steiner entered next, and it turned into a typical battle royal. Nash dumped Jarrett at 9:21, Hall backdropped McMichael out at 9:45. At this point the final 2 guys, Hogan and Piper, were scheduled to come out. Piper came out, and had a very awkward confrontation with Nash, who didn't sell any of his stuff. Nash punted Steiner over the top in 10:16. Hogan and Rodman made the big entrance, spending 3 minutes outside the ring posing for photos for the press, rather than bother with the match going on. Fans were chanting for Sting at this point. Once Hogan and Rodman made it to the ring, Piper and Hogan had one brawl in the aisle, which Hogan at least tried to make good, but poor Piper physically had nothing left. Piper took a bump over the top when Rodman pulled down the ropes. They had a ringside confrontation with Piper going after a backpedaling Rodman, but finally the NWO guys jumped Piper and Rodman choked Piper with a chain. In the ring, Hall gave Benoit the outsider's edge, and he and Nash threw him over the top in 16:27, leaving Luger with the entire team NWO. Same as Wrestle War. And same as Wrestle War, Luger made the big comeback, but not until they all ignored Luger and got together in a corner so they could pose for more photos with Rodman. Yes, now it's the photographers from outside the ring who call the spots. When the photographers were done with their photos, it was time to continue the match. Luger racked Savage in 1823. He clotheslined Nash over in 1831. He racked Hall in 1845. Give Savage and Hall credit for doing submission finishes. I mean, they were the only ones to do a job in the match. Luger then racked Hogan, but Savage got the spray paint can from Rodman, and clocked Luger with it, and Hogan fell on top for the pin. They all beat up Luger after, and Rodman spray painted NWO on his back and paint brushed him with slaps to the face. As they left him laying, Sting came down from the ceiling with a baseball bat and used the bat on Hall, Nash, and Savage, and dropped all of them with his new finisher. After building up the heat with Rodman, Hogan finally went in, but Sting dropped Hogan just as the show went off the air. 1 star. Results. March 2nd, Cabo Rojo, Puerto Rico, WWC, American Lightweight title, Pablo Marquez beat Chuck Singer to win title, Ricky Santana and La Ley beat Texas Hangman Killer and Skull Von Crush, Ray Gonzalez beat Jim Steele, Abdullah the Butcher and Huracan Castillo beat Invader No. 1 and Chicky Star. Universal title, Carlos Colon BL Nene DQ. March 7th, Nezahualcóyotl, AAA, Martha Villalobos and Migueli and Shidarabi Xochitl Hamada and La Rubia and Los Payasos B. Mascara Sagrada Jr. and Super Muñeco and Angel Satanico, Hector Garza and Heavy Metal and Latin Lover B. Crazy 33 and Killer and Jerry Estrada, Cage Match Pero Aguayo and Pero Aguayo Jr. B. Pierroth Jr. and Mosco de la Merced. March 7, Toluca, Promo Azteca, Super Electra and El Brazo and Ninja de Fuego B. Enrique Vera and Scandalo and Nigma, Vampiro Canadiense, and Fantasma, and Lizmark Jr. B. Blue Panther and Psicosis and Zapatista DQ, Promo Azteca Middleweight Tournament Finals, Angel Azteca B. Black Dragon, Pantera del Ring B. Black Dragon, Pantera B. Azteca to win title. March 7, Manatee, Puerto Rico, WWC, Alex G.D. Skull Von Crush, Chuck Singer B. Pablo Marquez, El Convicto 308 B. Ghetto Blaster, Ram Man, Johnny Evans, B. Farmer Sam Carlos Colon B. Jim Steele DQ, Abdullah the Butcher Kerchicki Star, Ray Gonzalez and Lale B. Rico Suave and Huracan Castillo. March 7, Hayward, California, All Pro Wrestling, 85 Sellout Donovan Morgan 1 Battle Royal, Aaron O'Grady B. Jason Clay, Morgan B. Steve Rizzono, Juan Camoze and Jay Smooth B. Frank Dalton and Boom Boom Kamini, Mike Diamond B. Robert Thompson, Vic Grimes NC Chris Cole. March 9, Springfield, Massachusetts, WWF, 4088, Crush B. Bob Holly, Savio Vega B. Bart Gunn, IC title, Rocky Maivia B. Sultan, Hunter Hurst Helmsley B. Flash Funk, Vader B. Ahmed Johnson, WWF tag titles, Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith B. Doug Furness and Phil LaFon, Goldust B. Mankind, Farouk B. Undertaker DQ, cage match for WWF titles Sid B. Bret Hart. March 10, Ube, New Japan, Akitoshi Saito B. Kazuyuki Fujita, Tadao Yasuda B. Yutaka Yoshi, Wild Pegasus B. Black Cat, Kengo Kimura and Osamu Nishimura B. Kunyaki Kobayashi and Akira Nagami, Koji Kanemoto and Shinjiro Otani and Tatsuhito Takaiwa B. Jushin Liger, and Norio Onaga and El Samurai, Faces of Fear and Steven Regal B. Junji Hirata and Satoshi Kojima and Keiji Muto, Masahiro Chono and Hiroyoshi Tenzan B. Kazuo Yamazaki and Takashi Iizuka, Shinya Hashimoto and Kensuke Sasaki and Manabu Nakanishi B. Shiro Koshinaka and Tatsutoshi Goto and Michiyoshi Ohara. March 11, Higashi Hiroshima, New Japan, Black Cat B. Yutaka Yoshi, El Samurai B. Norio Onaga, Junji Hirata and Shinjiro Otani B. Kunyaki Kobayashi and Michiyoshi Ohara, Kengo Kimura and Osamu Nishimura B. Akitoshi Saito and Tatsutoshi Goto, Jushin Liger and Wild Pegasus B. Tatsuhito Takaiwa and Koji Kanemoto, Faces of Fear and Steven Regal B. Satoshi Kojima and Manabu Nakanishi and Shinya Hashimoto, Kazuo Yamazaki and Takashi Iizuka B. Shiro Koshinaka and Akira Nagami, Masahiro Chono and Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Hiro Saito B. Keiji Muto and Kensuke Sasaki and Tadao Yasuda. March 11, Johnson City, Tennessee, Tennessee Mountain Wrestling, Dr. Dan and Orderly B. Spoilers, James Blevins B. Shotgun Willie, David Jericho and Steve Skyfire B. Brian Wayne and Justin St. John, Ricky Rocket B. J.D. Sullivan, Tracy Smothers D. Brian Lee, Dirty White Boy, T.L. Hopper, B. Buddy Landell. March 12, Toyoka, New Japan, 2000, Kazuyuki Fujita B. Yutaka Yoshi, El Samurai B. Black Cat, Kazuo Yamazaki B. Akitoshi Saito, Steven Regal B. Takashi Iizuka, Kengo Kimura and Osamu Nishimura B. Tatsutoshi Goto and Akira Nagami, Koji Kanemoto and Shinjiro Otani and Tatsuhito Takaiwa B. Jushin Liger and Wild Pegasus and Norio Onaga, Faces of Fear B. Keiji Muto and Tadao Yasuda, Manabu Nakanishi and Satoshi Kojima B. Michiyoshi Ohara and Shiro Koshinaka, Shinya Hashimoto and Junji Hirata and Kensuke Sasaki B. Masahiro Chono and Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Hiro Saito. March 12, Kushiro FMW, Shark Tsuchiya B. Yoko Ikeda, Hideki Hasaka and Dragon Winger B. Hideo Makimura and Riki Fuji, Kaori Nakayama B. Ri, Megumi Kudo B. Crusher Maidamari, Wing Kanemura and Haido B. Super Leather, Mike Kirchner, and Flying Kid Ichihara, Mr. Ganasuke and Katsutoshi Niyama B. Hayabusa and Hayato Nanjo, Street Fight the Gladiator, Mike Alfonso, and Hiskatsu Oya and Headhunters B. Masato Tanaka and Koji Nakagawa and Tetsuhiro Kuroda and Mr. Pogo 2, Gosaku Goshigawara. March 12, Louisville, Kentucky, IWA, Tower of Doom B. Kip Morris, Madman Pondo B. Ox Harley, Ricky Morton B. Vladimir Koloff, Gator McAllister B. Tommy Rich, Tarek the Great B. American Kickboxer, Bullpain B. Justin St. John, Ian Rotten B. Doug Gilbert, Terry Funk B. Tracy Smothers. March 13, Louisville, Kentucky, IWA Eddie Gilbert Memorial Show, 400 Tower of Doom B. Justin St. John, Kip Morris B. Bullpain, Tommy Rich B. Ricky Morton, Gator McAllister Enrico Beatty B. Tracy Smothers, and Ace Madison, Luna Vachon b. Debbie Combs. American Kickboxer b. Taras the Great. Vampire Warrior b. Vladimir Koloff. Madman Pondo 1 Triangle Match over Ian Rotten and Ox Harley. Dory Funk d. Tommy Gilbert. Chain Match Doug Gilbert b. Terry Funk. March 13th Asahikawa FMW. Hideo Makimura b. Mamoru Okamoto. Koji Nakagawa b. Hayato Nanjo. Elimination Match Megumi Kudo and Kaori Nakayama and Ri and Yoko Akeda b. Shark Tsuchiya and Crusher Maidamari and Miss Mongol and Miwa Sato. Hisakatsu Oya and Katsutoshi Niyama b. Mr. Pogo 2 and Masato Tanaka. Hayabusa and Riki Fuji b. Flying Kid Ichihara and Mr. Ganasuke Gladiator and Super Leather and Headhunters b. Wing Kanemura and Haido and Hideki Hasaka and Dragon Winger. March 13th Atsugi, All Japan Women. Mio Wakizawa b. Rumi Sekiguchi. Nani Takahashi b. Miyuki Fuji. Tani Mouse and Momoe Nakanishi b. Yukashina and Yumi Fukawa. Atsuko Mita and Yoshiko Tamura b. Saya Endo and Yumiko Hata. Mima Shimoda b. Genki Misae, Kyoko Inoue and Tomoko Watanabe and Kumiko Makawa b. Manami Toyota and Kaoru Ito and Ri Tamada. March 13th Bristol, England, All-Star Wrestling. Pete Collins b. Kazmir Singh. Pete and Dan Collins b. Jason Cross and Liverpool Rocker. Johnny Kid D. Tom Thigh, Skull Murphy and Pete and Dan Collins b. Cross and Rocker and Phil Powers and Singh and Ian Diamond. March 14th Sapporo Nakajima Sports Center, FMW 6520 sellout. Flying Kid Ichihara and Super Leather b. Mr. Pogo 2 and Hayato Nanjo. Miss Mongol and Crusher Maidamari b. Yoko Akeda and Ri Shark Tsuchiya b. Kaori Nakayama. Mr. Ganasuke and Katsutoshi Niyama b. Riki Fuji and Hayabusa. Geto and Jado and Hiromichi Fuyuki b. Hideki Hasaka and Haido and Wing Kanemura. No Rope Barbed Wire Deathmatch Kagumi Kudo b. Shinobu Kandori. Tornado Street Fight Deathmatch Atsushi Onita and Masato Tanaka and Koji Nakagawa and Tetsuhiro Kuroda be the Gladiator and Hiskatsu Oya and Headhunters. March 14th Louisville, Kentucky, WWF 4375. Blackjacks be Godwins, Crush be Aldo Montoya, Mankind be Flash Funk. WWF Tag Titles, Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith be Doug Furness and Phil LaFon. Savio Vega be Goldust, WWF Title. Sid B. Vader, Ahmed Johnson b. Sultan. IC Title Rocky Maivia b. Hunter Hearst Helmsley. March 14th Downingtown, Pennsylvania, ECW 700. Axel Rotten b. Spike Dudley. Steve Williams b. Balls Mahoney. Chris Chetty b. Little Guido. ECW Tag Titles. Eliminators b. Brian Lee and Raven. Bubba Ray and D. Von Dudley b. Lou Spicoli and New Jack. Rob Van Dam b. Pitbull No. 2. ECW TV Title Shane Douglas b. Pitbull No. 1 DQ. Sabu b. Chris Candido, Tommy Dreamer and Sandman b. Dudleys. March 14th Mexico City Arena, Mexico, EMLL 3500, Ciclanchito Ramirez and Ultimo Dragon Cheeto b. Pierroth Tito and Damian Cito, Solar and Astro Ray Jr. and Super Astro b. Valencia and Archangel and Karloff Lagarde Jr., Atlantis and Ryder Jalisco Jr. and Lizmark b. Emilio Charles Jr. and Apollo Dantes and Black Warrior. La Fiera and Black Magic and Negro Casas b. Bestia Salvaje and Dr. Wagner Jr. and Silver King, NWA Middleweight Title Ultimo Dragon b. Scorpio Jr. March 14th Shigara All Japan Women, Mio Wakizawa b. Miyuki Fuji, Tani Mouse b. Nani Takahashi, Yukashina d. Yoshiko Tamura, Yumiko Hara and Ri Tamada and Yumi Fukawa b. Momoe Nakanishi and Genki Misae and Atsuko Mita, Tomoko Watanabe b. Saya Endo, Kumiko Maikawa and Kaoru Ito b. Kyoko Inoue and Mima Shimoda. March 14th Fukuoka, Battlerts, Minoru Tanaka b. Hidaka, Katsumi Yujuda b. Shoichi Funaki, Tatsuo Nakano b. Alexander Otsuka, Daisuke Ikeda and Takeshi Ono b. Naohiro Hoshikawa and Yuki Ishikawa. March 14th Cordell, Georgia, Peach State Wrestling Final Show, 576, Jimmy Powell b. The Nightmare, Ted Allen. Billy Kidman b. Handsome Stranger, Danny West, Sheik Donovan b. Bucky Siegler, Chris Walker and Paul Golden b. Fred Avery and Jim Bryant, Bobby Dean b. Little Tokyo, Bambi b. Amazon Queen, Bull Rope Match, Botswana Beast, Giant Kimala 2 b. Dennis Gale, Tommy Rich b. Masked Superstar, Phil Eady, Texas Death Match R.D. Swain b. Billy Black. March 14th Chelsea, Massachusetts, Century Wrestling Alliance 415, Maverick Wild b. Kid USA, Tombstone b. Joel Davis, El Mascarado, Bert Centeno b. Pink Assassin, Stormtrooper b. Knuckles Nelson DQ, Mercenary b. Danny Justice, Smooth Operator b. Power Company No. 1, Curtis Slondog b. Jose Valenzuela, Rick Fuller b. Power Company No. 2 DQ, Tim McNeely b. Rocky Shore, Muhammad Hossein, Lou Fabiano, and Shabazz, Paul Zine, the Astro Man and Mascarado, Vic Steamboat B. Nelson, Tony Atlas Kurt Tony Rumble. March 14th Toms River, New Jersey, New Jack City Wrestling, 300 Magic B. Chino, Frankie Burns B. Amazing Martine, Hellraiser B. Overweight Lover, Lucifer B. Cujo DQ, Latin Low Riders B. Misfits, Supernova B. Reckless Youth, Devon Storm B. Ace Darling, King Kong Bundy B. Doink the Clown, Gary Fall aka Ray Apollo. March 15th Philadelphia ECW Arena, ECW 1100 Tommy Rich and Little Guido B. Chris Chetty and Tracy Smothers, Taz B. Rob Van Dam, Sabu B. Spike Dudley, 2 of 3 Falls, Chris Condito B. Louis Spicoli, a quit match for ECW TV title, Shane Douglas B. Pitbull No. 1, Sandman B. Balls Mahoney, ECW tag titles, Bubba Ray and D. Von Dudley B. eliminators to win titles, Terry Funk B. Brian Lee, Raven 1 triangle match over Stevie Richards and Tommy Dreamer. March 15th Landover, MD, WWF, 4429, Crush B. Aldo Montoya Dud, Blackjacks B. Godwin's Dud, Mankind B. Flash Funk 1 3/4 stars, IC title, Rocky Maivia B. Hunter Hearst Helmsley 2 stars, WWF title, Sid B. Vader 1/2 of 1 star, Savio Vega B. Goldust 1/2 of 1 star, Ahmed Johnson B. Sultan 1 star, WWF tag titles, Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith B. Doug Furness and Phil LaFon 2.5 stars, Undertaker B. Farouk 1/2 of 1 star. March 15th Florence, South Carolina, WCW, 4886, Jeff Jarrett B. Bobby Eaton, Conan B. Chavo Guerrero Jr., Marcus Bagwell B. Rick Steiner Core, Billy Kidman B. Eddie Guerrero Core, Diamond Dallas Page B. Randy Savage, WCW tag titles, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash B. Lex Luger and the Giant DQ. March 15th Minami Ashikaga, New Japan, 2350 sellout, Akitoshi Saito B. Kazuyuki Fujita, Kunyaki Kobayashi B. Yutaka Yoshi, Steven Regal B. Black Cat, Shinjiro Otani and Koji Kanemoto and Tatsuhito Takaiwa B. Norio Onaga and Jushin Liger and El Samurai, Masahiro Chono and Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Hiro Saito B. Osamu Nishimura and Tatsumi Fujinami and Kensuke Sasaki, Shinya Hashimoto and Satoshi Kojima and Manabu Nakanishi B. Kazuo Yamazaki and Takashi Iizuka and Osamu Kido, Keiji Muto B. Michiyoshi Ohara, Akira Nagami and Tatsutoshi Goto and Shiro Koshinaka B. Riki Chashu and Junji Hirata and Tadao Yasuda. March 15th Chitose, FMW, Hideo Makimura B. Mamoru Okamoto, Haido and Dragon Winger B. Mr. Pogo 2 and Hayato Nanjo, Kaori Nakayama and Ribi Shark Tsuchiya and Miwasato Megumi Kudo B. Miss Mongol, Wing Kanemura and Hideki Hasaka B. Super Leather and Flying Kid Ichihara, Headhunters B. Hayabusa and Riki Fuji, The Gladiator and Hisakatsu Oya and Mr. Ganasuke and Katsutoshi Niyama B. Atsushi Onita and Masato Tanaka and Koji Nakagawa and Tetsuhiro Kuroda. March 15th Tokyo Korakuen Hall, Gia, 2050 sellout, Chihiro Nakano B. Kyoko Ichiki, Sugar Sato and Chikeo Nagashima B. Maiko Matsumoto and Rina Ishii, Miki Numao B. Toshie Uematsu, Chigusa Nagio B. Amami Kato and Sakura Hirota, Sonoko Kato and Akira Hokuto B. Meiko Satomura and Kaoru. March 15th Kawamoto, All Japan Women, Nani Takahashi B. Miho Wakezawa, Momoe Nakanishi B. Rumi Sekiguchi, Yumi Fukawa and Yoshiko Tamura B. Tanny Mouse and Yuka Shina, Takako Inoue B. Genki Misae, Manami Toyota and Kaoru Ito and Kumiko Makawa B. Asia Kong and Mima Shimoda and Ri Tamada. March 15th Matsuzaka, JWP, Tomoko Kuzumi B. Sari Azumi, Rieko Amano B. Tomoko Miyaguchi, Mayumi Ozaki B. Kanako Matoya, Kyuri Suzuki and Hikari Fukuoka B. Plum Mariko and Devil Masami, Kuzumi and Candy Akutsu and Fukuoka and Suzuki B. Azumi and Mariko and Dynamite Kansai and Boyshoi Kid. March 15th Naha Okinawa, JD, 1015, La Infernal and Bloody Phoenix B. Yuko Kasugi and Kuga, Aldo Moreno and Bison Kimura B. Yuki Lee and Esther Moreno, Miyuki Sagabi and Jaguar Yokota B. Sachi Abe and Chikako Shiratori, Kimura and A. Moreno B. Infernal and Phoenix, Ryusha and Lioness Ashka B. Yokota and Sagabi. March 15th Kaiser West Virginia, National Wrestling League, Salvatore Sincere B. Jason Knight, Big Slam B. Slicky Boy and Lab Experiment, Black Hawk and Bruiser Brandon and Hollywood Miles B. Switchblade and J.R. Blackburn and Lust, Sudden Impact B. Julio Sanchez and Bob Starr, Conan 2000, Scott Putski B. Jimmy Cicero, Headbangers B. Steve Corino and Adam Flash. March 16th New York Madison Square Garden, WWF, 8513, Sultan B. Flash Funk, Blackjacks B. Godwins, Crush b Aldo Montoya Ahmed Johnson b Savio Vega DQ, WWF Tag Titles, Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith b Doug Furnace and Phil LaFon. IC title, Hunter Hearst Helmsley b Rocky Maivia DQ, Farouk b Goldust, Casket Match, Vader b Undertaker, Cage Match for WWF title, Sid b Bret Hart. March 16, Numazu, New Japan, 2600 sellout, Yutaka Yoshi b Kazuyuki Fujita, Akira Nagami b Takashi Iizuka, El Samurai b Shinjiro Otani, Jushin Liger and Norio Onaga b Tatsuhito Takaiwa and Koji Kanemoto, Tadao Yasuda and Junji Hirata and Kensuke Sasaki b Akitoshi Saito and Kunyaki Kobayashi and Tatsutoshi Goto, Osamu Nishimura and Tatsumi Fujinami and Osamu Kido b Satoshi Kojima and Manabu Nakanishi and Shinya Hashimoto, Riki Chashu and Kazuo Yamazaki b Steven Regal and Keiji Muto, Shiro Koshinaka and Michiyoshi Ohara b Masahiro Chono and Hiroyoshi Tenzan. March 16, Yahaba, Michinoku Pro, 1014 sellout, Wellington Wilkins Jr. b Naohiro Hoshikawa, Hanzo Nakajima b Alexander Otsuka, Pantera and Vampiro Kanadiense b Pero Russo and Sakura, Jinsei Shinzaki b Shiryu, Dick Togo and Men's Teo and Takamichinoku and Shoichi Funaki and Masayoshi Motegi b Great Sasuke and Grand Hamada and Super Delphin and Grand Naniwa and Masato Yakashiji. March 16, Naha, Okinawa, JD, 1750, Yuki Lee b Sachi Abe, Shikako Shiratori b Yuko Kasugi, Jaguar Yokota and Miyuki Sagabi b La Infernal and Bloody Phoenix, Kuga b Esther Moreno, Bison Kimura and Alda Moreno b Linus Ashka and Ryusha. March 16, Maibashi, Big Japan, Shigeo Okamura b Yosuke Kobayashi, Yoshihiro Tajiri b Goku, Taurus b Crusher Takahashi, Takashi Ishikawa and Kishin Kawabata b Kendo Nagasaki and Yuichi Taniguchi, Tajiri b Fantastique, Barbed Wire Board Street Fight Deathmatch Shoji Nakamaki and Seiji Yamakawa b Mitsuhiro Matsunaga and Satoru Shiga. March 17, Syracuse, New York, WWF Monday Night Raw and Shotgun Tapings 4737, Aldo Montoya b Spellbinder, Road Warriors b Savio Vega and Crush DQ 1 1/4 stars, Hunter Hearst Helmsley b Flash Funk 2 1/4 stars, Mini Goldust and Mascara de Sagrada Jr. b Mini Vader and Mini Mankind, Sultan b Mike Bell, Davey Boy Smith b Vader DQ 2 stars, Billy Gunn b Aaron Ferguson, Cage Match for WWF title Sid b Bret Hart, Goldust b Tony DeVito, Mascara de Sagrada Jr. b Mini Mankind, Blackjack Bradshaw NC Henry Godwin, Undertaker and Goldust and Ahmed Johnson b Farouk and Vega and Crush. March 17, Savannah, Georgia, WCW Monday Nitro Tapings, 5,413 sellout /4,397 paid, Rey Mysterio Jr. b Psychosis, Diamond Dallas Page b Max, Conan and Hugh Morris b Joe Gomez and Renegade, U.S. title, Dean Malenko b Scotty Riggs, Lex Luger and the Giant BT Ranchula and Knuckles Nelson, Ultimo Dragon b Bobby Eaton, Jeff Jarrett and Steve McMichael b Mark Starr and Alex Wright, Scott Norton b Chavo Guerrero Jr. WCW Tag Titles Scott Hall and Kevin Nash b Bunkhouse Buck and Mike Enos, Chris Benoit b Billy Kidman, Steiner's NC Harlem Heat. Special thanks to Jerry Lane, Georgianne Macropolis, Roland Alexander, Phil Jones, James Titus, Dominic Valenti, Manuel Gonzalez, Kim Lambert, Terry England, Ken Doucet, Leonard Brand, Mike Mahoney Jr., Edie Bailey, Bruce Buchanan, Dan Paris, Joe Silva, Steve Dr. Lucha Sims, Mike Omansky, Tammy Gable, Rich Palladino, Earl Lunsford, Scott Cornish, Scott Hudson, Jesse Money. Puerto Rico. A couple of title changes over the past few weeks. Pablo Marquez, who wrestled in ECW last year as El Puerto Ricano, won the American lightweight title from Chuck Singer on March 2 in Cabo Rojo. Singer came to Puerto Rico with the title. Still no word on who he is. Ricky Santana and Lale were awarded the WWC Tag Team titles. They were supposed to win the title from the Texas Hangman, but Hangman Psycho no-showed the title match. Don't know if he was injured or what, however Hangman Killer is still with the promotion, and the belts were simply awarded to them instead. Biggest news over the past week is that after all the build-up, Chicky Star turned on Invader #1 in a tag match on March 2 in Cabo Rojo against Abdullah the Butcher and Huracan Castillo. Invader accidentally hit Star in the stomach. When Invader tried to check on Star, Star yelled at him about what he did and told him to leave him alone. Invader went back in the ring and got destroyed and juiced heavily. Star would never tag back in and Invader was bleeding heavily. Finally Invader got to the corner again but Star walked out on him and left the ringside area and Abdullah pinned Invader. Starr came back in after the match and attacked Invader, and Invader did a stretcher job. Invader was then kept out of action over the next week to sell the angle, while Starr continued to work as a babyface over the next week in matches against Butcher. However, Starr was booked as a heel over this past weekend in singles against Ray Gonzalez and Butcher. Invader returned on March 13th, and his first match against Starr was March 16th in Caguas. The Heartbreakers are the new heel tag team in the area, feuding with Santana and Lawley over the belts. Missy Hyatt was also announced as appearing in women's matches against La Tigresa on all the shows this past weekend. It has been reported everywhere that Hyatt is pregnant from current beau Scott Bednarski, Scott Putski, so doubt she made the bookings. Actually, we have a report from the weekend of Hyatt seconding Conan 2000 Putski from West Virginia, so I guess that answers that question. On the rival WWA television show, Savio Vega was on explaining that he was neither a face nor a heel but simply a member of the Nation of Domination. Although they still talk about Shawn Michaels and Undertaker coming in, they haven't given any dates, and the only show they've run of late was a television taping on March 12th in a place that holds 75 people, and they charge $2 a head for tickets, building up feuds with such well-known grapplers as Danny Boy vs. Bob Hayes, Sabucan vs. Wizard, El Bronco vs. Teniente Rios, and Pulgarcito. EMLL. The March 21st show, which is exactly 100 years to the date of birth of Salvador Lutteroth, the promoter who started EMLL back in the 1930s and was the leading promoter in Mexico until his death. The card will feature a one-night trios tournament. The teams announced are Miguel Perez and Sean Morley, and a mystery foreigner. They are attempting to get either Chris Jericho or Meng from WCW for this slot. Lizmark and Rayo de Jalisco Jr. at Atlantis. Bestia Salvaje and Scorpio Jr. at El Hijo del Santo. Brazo de Oro and Brazo de Plata and Shocker. Negro Casas and Dandy and Mr. Niebla. El Satanico and Rey Bucanero and Emilio Charles Jr., Dr. Wagner Jr. and Apollo Dantes and El Hijo del Gladiador and Ultimo Dragon, who from what we understand won't be there, and Subata and Shinobi. Arena Mexico crowds over the past few weeks are lower than we had originally been told from the newspaper reports. The tag team tournament drew closer to 5,000 both weeks than 10,000, and the March 7th and March 14th shows were around 3,500. The March 14th card was headlined by Ultimo Dragon pinning Scorpio Jr. to retain the NWA middleweight title. Don't ask me when or how Dragon got that title. Silver King and Dr. Wagner Jr. are now doing a gimmick where they paint their opponents with white paint after the match. On March 7th at Arena Mexico, they painted Negro Casas in black magic, the latter pretty much from head to toe. Promo Azteca. The TV taping over the weekend was March 14th in Toluca with Conan and La Parca and Zorro vs. Cien Caras and Blue Panther and Pirata Morgan plus Rey Mysterio Jr. and Super Caloa and Antifaz del Norte vs. Psicosis and Juventud Guerrera and Zapatista. AAA. The war heated up once again with Antonio Pena filing lawsuits this past week against Conan, Rey Mysterio Jr., Psicosis and Juventud Guerrera for breach of contract for leaving AAA for Promo Azteca and WCW. The lawsuit not only calls for dissolvement of the group's connection with Azteca, but also with WCW. When Pena made the deal with Vince McMahon, Eric Bischoff immediately put the pressure on to make sure all the Mexican talent in WCW was signed to WCW contracts. WCW received a legal letter from AAA saying those contracts should be voided since most of the wrestlers who had signed them already had existing deals with AAA. WWF may be involved in this since one would figure if AAA were to win the suit and control the bookings of these wrestlers, they may be forced to work for WWF, although all of that happening seems at this point to be a remote possibility. The same group has countersued Pena asking for back union dues that they are supposed to receive upon leaving the company and for monies owed them for appearing on television and merchandising that they have yet to receive. Pena had previously filed a suit against La Parca several weeks back to try and keep Parca from using the name. Pena is using two wrestlers with similar customers, La Calaca and La Parca Jr., neither of whom is getting over because they are bad copies. There are several other lawsuits out there, but a lawsuit from a ways back involving the former AAA minis, Mascarada Sagrada, Octagonchito, Churrito Estrada, etc., should be coming to court in about 2 weeks, and a lot of people see the result of that suit as a barometer for future suits and that whichever side wins will be favored in the future. Biggest weekend show was March 14th in Zacatecas with Pero Aguayo and Cibernetico in Mascara Sagrada vs. Razor Ramon and Diesel and Pierre Auth Jr., Latin Lover and Heavy Metal and Hector Garza vs. Jerry Estrada, and La Calaca and Crazy 33 as the two headline matches. On this weekend's television, they announced that Vader, Mankind, Paul Bearer and Undertaker would be appearing at Triple Mania. The show is tentatively scheduled for the first week of May, but no site has been finalized. Bret Hart's name wasn't mentioned. They also pushed Diesel and Razor Ramon and the MWO angle. Latin Lover retained the Mexican light heavyweight title, beating Crazy 33, a veteran wrestler who has been working the Juarez circuit for years, and Pena is now bringing to Mexico City on March 9th in Juarez. They did a show-long angle where Jerry Estrada handcuffed Hector Garza to the ring post in a trios match, making it 3-on-2. After that match ended, during the Latin Crazy match, Estrada was interfering and Garza came out and handcuffed him to the ring post. All Japan. It was officially announced by All Japan that former UWFI wrestler Yuhi Sano would be working house shows on March 30th in Nagoya and April 14th in Niigata on the current tour. His matches weren't announced. The match for Hayabusa on the April 2nd Osaka show will be an underneath tag match with Hayabusa and the Masked Tornado, the returning Richard Slinger, facing Satoru Asako and Manukia Mossman. Appearances by both Sano and Hayabusa come on the heels of the March 1st Budokan Hall show where former UWFI wrestler Yoshihiro Takayama challenged for the double tag team title. That match aired on the March 9th television show and drew another excellent 4.8 rating. New Japan. Tokyo Dome tickets for April 12th aren't moving well. The belief now is that even though Naoya Ogawa's debut has drawn tremendous mainstream press, it hasn't resulted in ticket sales because wrestling fans are left flat by the match since the excitement level was so strong for Ken Shamrock versus Shinya Hashimoto. New Japan has added a Legends match with Antonio Inoki versus Tiger Mask Sayama under supposed Vale Tudo rules, but even that announcement did create a rush at box office. Although these matches weren't expected to officially be announced until later this week, other matches penciled in for the card are Tatsumi Fujinami and Kengo Kimura defending the IWGP Tag Team titles against Riki Choshu and Kensuke Sasaki, Shiro Koshinaka versus Takashi Ishikawa. They are starting a preliminary match angle with the Ishikawa Ika promotion against New Japan, Manabu Nakanishi versus Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Satoshi Kojima, and Junji Hirata versus Kazuo Yamazaki and Osamu Kido. There is still the thought that if New Japan books the Tokyo Dome, that the day of the show the fans will come because the group has been so successful in promoting major shows the past few years. It appears that the long-term plan is for Inoki to create his own little so-called Shooters Valley Tudo type of group with himself, Sayama, Ogawa, Yuji Nagata, currently in WCW, Tokumitsu Ishizawa and Kazuyuki Fujita. The latter three were all amateur wrestling champions and Olympic team hopefuls in Japan, that would eventually feud with the New Japan guys. The only major in-ring angle of the past week was March 11th in Higashi, Hiroshima. After the main event where the NWO team of Masahiro Chono and Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Hiro Saito beat Keiji Muto and Tadao Yasuda and Kensuke Sasaki, Chono put down his NWO t-shirt. Muto took the shirt and left with it, continuing their version of the Sting angle. Chris Benoit and Faces of Fear returned to WCW this past week, so Steven Regal was the only WCW wrestler on the shows over the weekend. Marcus Bagwell, Imposter Sting and Scott Norton among others go for the big shows this week along with Eric Bischoff and Sonny Ono. Tatsumi Fujinami's Muga promotion is running a tournament on March 30th in Osaka using several Lancashire, England wrestlers like Chris Bacon, Darren Maroons and Shane Lispy along with two Japanese wrestlers who are Fujinami protégés. Kengo Kimura is officially no longer part of the High Group now that he is tag team champion with Fujinami. March 8th TV show did only an 0.9 rating. Other Japan notes. In a television interview on March 18th, Akira Maeda, 37, announced that he would be retiring in 1998, saying that full contact fighting, which rings purportedly isn't something he could do at the age of 40. Maeda headlines the next two rings shows facing Kiyoshi Tamura and Folk Han respectively on March 28th and April 22nd. FMW ran one of its biggest shows of the year on March 14th, selling out Sapporo's Nakajima Sports Center to the tune of 6,520 fans due to the appearance of Atsushi Onita in the main event. Onita teamed with Masato Tanaka and Koji Nakagawa and Tetsuhiro Kuroda to beat the Gladiator and Hisakatsu Oya and Headhunters in a Tornado Street fight match in 1652. After the match, Katsutoshi Niyama, who just turned heel, along with Mr. Ganasuke, joined the rest of the heels in beating on Onita. It wound up with 10 wrestlers brawling all over the building using chains, chairs and tables. The brawl continued until an official at the building said if the fight doesn't stop that they would ban FMW from ever using the building again. They even threatened not to rent the gym to any pro wrestling promotions, which would be a huge blow since that's considered the main arena for big shows on the island of Hokkaido. After losing 2 matches, Megumi Kudo finally got her revenge on LLPW Shinobu Kondori, winning a no-rope barbed wire death match. After the match, Kudo challenged Svetlana Gundarenko, the 315-pound woman Olympic judo star from Russia who won the first women's Ultimate tournament in 1995 in her retirement match, which is April 29th at Yokohama Arena in the big FMW show of the year. Geto and Jado and Hiromichi Fuyuki started with FMW and earned the next shot at the six-man street fight title, beating Hideki Hasaka and Hido and Wing Kanemura to set up a title shot at Oya and Headhunters on March 21st in Sendai. With Fuyuki's promotion opening up on March 29th, the gimmick is they want to bring the FMW belts to their new promotion. Fuyuki called out Onita and Onita went after him but was held back by Tanaka and Kuroda. This was an angle where Onita said that he wanted a fight with Fuyuki and he would be going to Chitose the next day to meet up with Fuyuki. However, while Onita worked the Chitose main event, Fuyuki didn't come to the show. Hayabusa attended a Michinoku Pro show and had a meeting with Jinsei Shinzaki, which is an angle to set up Shinzaki appearing on the Team FMW on April 29th as they face Terry Funk's Funk Masters of Wrestling, American FMW. Peter Aerts beat Andy Hug, ending Hug's 10-match winning streak in the main event of K1's King of Kings show, which sold out Yokohama Arena 17,000+ on March 16th and also aired on Fuji Network. Aerts won via first-round knockout in 2:52. Hug may have lost because he went into the match with a fever and didn't have his usual stamina. Hug was generally considered the #1 kickboxer in the world at this time. Got a tape of the February 2nd Rings show from Amsterdam, Holland, and it appeared every match was a shoot. Many of the matches were really brutal. Masayuki Naruse got a knee to the eye and his eye was busted open really bad and they had to immediately stop the match. His opponent, Valentine Alfreum, was a lot taller and had a reach advantage, although Naruse may have beaten him had he not taken the knee. Mitsuya Nagai just got hammered by much larger Yob Castale, 6'5", 275. Kiyoshi Tamura had an easy time with Andre Minato winning quickly with a choke. The main event with Dick Frey versus Pedro Palm was the craziest of all. Frey was all jacked up, looking like he did when he first showed up in Japan many years ago, and basically in 74 seconds violated every single rule he could as quickly as he could. As you could see, he feared his guy, and finally laid him out on the ground largely and began kicking him in the face and KO'd him, so it was ruled no contest. It looked like a UFC match. Actually, the card itself looked more like Brazilian Vale Tudo matches than like typical UFC, rings or pancrase style because of the brutality, and the shooting in a smaller ring favoring the striking above the takedown guys. Paul Lesenby, who headlines the March 22nd pancrase card against Masakatsu Funaki and debuted on the last pancrase show, is actually a pro wrestler from Winnipeg who has worked indies in both that area and in Detroit under names like Rocky Carnera, Rocky Stallone, Death Wolf Fenris and Kaiser Khosrow, doing a combination Iron Sheik and Shoot Fighter gimmick. Takamichi Noku will wrestle on the April 27th pancrase show at Tokyo Bay NK Hall. This would be the first time that a star from a Japanese pro wrestling office would do a match on a pancrase show. The JD promotion ran a 2-night tag team tournament in Naha, Okinawa, ending on March 16th with Bison Kimura and Aldo Moreno beating Linus Ashka and Ryusha. Vampiro Canadiense from Promo Azteca and Pero Russo, an American who lives in Tijuana and has worked local shows in that city, are both on tour right now for Michinoku Pro Wrestling. Tiger Mask, who holds the Mexican UWA's version of the world middleweight title, vacated the belt due to being out of action with injuries. The new champ will be decided in a match on March 19th in Yonezawa between Pantera vs. Shoichi Funaki, and Shiryu will get the first shot at the winner on March 30th in Akita. Also in Akita, Takamichi Noku defends the independent junior title from the FMW promotion against Grand Naniwa. USWA. Tank of the Truth Commission, Mike Mantor Halleck, won the unified title from Jerry Lawler on the March 22nd television show in Memphis through use of a foreign object. The Truth Commission, as mentioned earlier, is a WWF gimmick they are trying out here. The Commandant, who is the manager of the three-man team, is said to be the best of the four. He's an actor that befriended Bret Hart in South Africa last year. The other three guys are Halleck, a tall guy from Canada who is said to be terrible, and Barry Buchanan, who reports shows some potential. Actually, of all the newcomers, the best one according to our reports is former Windy City wrestler Steve Boz from Chicago, who looked good in his debut this week. Wolfie D and Jamie Dundee lost a loser leaves town match on March 12th in Memphis to Billy Travis and Flash Flanagan. This time there's no gimmick involved. The two basically have been wanting to quit the promotion and wanted to make sure they wouldn't lose their job in WWF if they quit. They were told to work out proper notice and leave, which is what they did. With Lance Russell on vacation, Michael St. John did the show with Dutch Mantle and Stacy. They were making jokes that Russell had only been on the job for a few weeks and he already got a vacation. Business is way down across the board and there is a lot of talk about impending doom, particularly since the March 12th show in Memphis drew something like 250 fans and a $1,300 house, but the loser leaves town match. The main on that show was Lawler vs. Reggie B. Fine, and if Lawler won, he'd get 5 minutes with Queen Nikki, who was apparently the girlfriend of area indie wrestler Crazy Luke Graham Jr., who I believe is no relation to the original. Lawler won, but Reginald pile drove him and Nikki started on him for a few minutes. Lawler made his comeback, and finished doing the Tommy Dreamer piledriver spot where the dress falls down. Nikki got into it later with ref Downtown Bruno and they are now feuding. They are building up a tag team feud with Brian Christopher and Bill Dundee feuding with Brackus and Spellbinder as the heels interfered in each other's singles matches. Brackus was said to look exceptionally bad against Dundee. Next Memphis house show is March 22nd. Don't know if this was an angle or simply an inside joke, but they had syndicator Bill Behrens on television talking about how USWA syndication is going all over the country and there is demand for it everywhere. He said the biggest demand was in Philadelphia because the fans there want some good wrestling for a change. Mike Samples came out and had a demo tape and tried to get his own syndicated show, but Behrens threw the tape in the garbage can. ECW. Notes from March 15th at the ECW arena before an estimated 1,100 fans. Crowd was down from usual. Little Guido and Tommy Rich beat Tracy Smothers and Chris Chetti. After the match, Smothers turned on Chetti and joined the full-blooded Italians. Smothers did a great job as a heel. He's been one of the most underrated heels in the business for some time. Taz beat Rob Van Dam. Sabu beat Spike Dudley using the Tazmission finish, which caused Taz to come out. It wound up with Sabu putting Bill Alfonso through a table. They did a segment where it was announced on the April 13th show that the triangle match for the title shot later in the card would have Stevie Richards, Sandman, and Tommy Dreamer. Dreamer then gave up his spot in the match to Terry Funk, saying how much of a dream it would be for him to be on a pay-per-view and win the world title, but that this was Funk's last chance, so he wanted him to get the shot. Chris Condito beat Louis Spicolli in a 2 out of 3 falls match. There were fans booing and heckling this match because the two tried to do a wrestling match. In the second fall, Spicolli messed up his leg, which is apparently a pulled hamstring and not serious enough that he'll even miss next weekend's matches. But at the time they didn't know it, so they went home immediately with Condito using the figure 4 to win the second and third falls. Shane Douglas beat Pitbull No. 1 in the I Quit match for the TV title. PB had the full Nelson on and Douglas quit, but the ref was distracted by Francine. Francine undid the turnbuckles. Later in the match, Pitbull got his neck caught in the ropes and Francine was tightening them, but he wouldn't quit, and Douglas added to it by using a full Nelson. Pitbull No. 2 came out, but he was jumped by Condito and Brian Lee and tied to the post, and they kept hitting him with chairs hard and he bled heavily and was laid out, so Pitbull No. 1 quit the match in order to save Pitbull No. 2 from more of a beating. Sandman beat Balls Mahoney in a very brutal match. Dudley's beat Eliminators clean to win the ECW tag titles when Bubba used the Bubba Cutter on Perry Saturn. Terry Funk beat Brian Lee after a DDT through a garbage can in a match where Funk did 2 moonsaults. Apparently Funk really put on a performance here because a lot of people felt it was the best match on the show. Main event was scheduled to be Raven and a partner to be picked from a drawing against Dreamer and Richards. Somehow the partner picked in the drawing turned out to be Richards, so it wound up as a 3-way dance. The crowd didn't like this at all, as most were expecting a mystery partner to debut. Lee interfered and put Dreamer through a table. Raven again dared Richards to superkick him. As he was about to, a stripper type came out of the stands who has been chasing Richards at the B shows and started kissing Richards. As he got away from the kiss, Raven DDT'd him for the pin and the stripper then joined up with Raven. Dreamer then made the comeback and pile drove the stripper, but the pop wasn't nearly what it's been for similar spots in the past. The show ended up with a huge brawl with most of the top guys involved, and New Jack jumped off these giant speakers with a crazy dive. On the show before, he did a running dive off one of the balconies. Reviews of the show we received overall weren't good, with most saying it was the worst arena show in a long time. Others said the show itself wasn't that bad, but it came off as bad because the crowd was dead after intermission and that the arena crowd has seen so much it's hard to get them to maintain intensity. The other weekend show was March 14th in Downingtown, Pennsylvania, which drew 700. Steve Williams beat Balls Mahoney on the Downingtown show and was supposed to do a handicap match at the arena. It was never advertised, but that was the plan. Not sure why, but he wasn't at the arena. Dreamer and Sandman beat Dudley's, and Eliminators beat Lee and Raven to keep the tag titles, a match where Raven and Lee didn't get along. There was another incident with New Jack backstage at the arena. New Jack was on the balcony with someone who was apparently either a promoter or booker for Soul City Wrestling, a local indie that uses mainly African American wrestlers. Next thing anyone knows, it appeared New Jack tried to throw the guy off the balcony. The guy escaped and ran down the stairs and tried to run away. New Jack did another balcony jump, this time one he wasn't getting paid for, and kind of bulldogged the guy and got 2 punches in before the guy got away and began running for his life. Apparently Sabu pretty much saved the guy's life as he helped him escape while about 10 other wrestlers, seeing one of the wrestlers in a fight, were about to join in and kill the guy. Sabu's ankle and tailbone are said to be hurting from the recent table spots. Surprisingly, the pay-per-view show on April 13th at the arena isn't sold out, which is quite a contrast to the WCW Nitro the next night at the Spectrum that has already topped 9,000 tickets in advance sales, and tickets have only been on sale for 5 days while the ECW tickets have been on sale for a few weeks. Some ECW regulars are complaining about the high ticket prices, $40 GA, for the show. In addition, many of the suburban cable systems in the Philadelphia area aren't carrying the show because of the wrong affiliation, which should have only made the early sellout that much easier. Here and there. Ian Rotten ran his Eddie Gilbert Memorial Show on March 13th in Louisville before about 400 fans. Several major stars worked the show, including former Gilbert tag team partners Tommy Rich and Ricky Morton, along with the Funk Brothers. Doug Gilbert beat Terry Funk in a chain match to headline the show in a match built to crown the king of wrestling in Louisville, while Tommy Gilbert and Dory Funk went to a time limit draw. They played hot stuff before and after the show, and it was said to be a great emotional show. Lots of the wrestlers, including Terry, Dory, Tommy Gilbert, Rich, Morton, Tracy Smothers, and Eddie's mother Peggy, gave speeches to the fans about Eddie. And on the same show they held a 4 corners of pain triangle match with barbed wire, broken glass, mouse traps, and broken light bulbs with Ox Harley, Ian Rotten, and Madman Pondo, with Pondo winning. Rotten also held a show on March 12th in Louisville with Terry Funk over Smothers and Ian Rotten over Doug Gilbert. Ben Masters Peach State Wrestling ran its farewell show on March 14th in Cordell, Georgia before 576 fans. In the final match of the promotion, a Texas death match saw R.D. Swain beat Billy Black by pile-driving him through the ring, with the ring falling apart and the boards breaking underneath. The main event on that show was former Georgia stars from 15 years back Tommy Rich pin Masked Superstar, Bill Eadie. Promo Azteca wrestlers Zapatista Pirata Morgan Jr. and Monterrey wrestler Ruben Juarez Jr. are supposed to be going to work for a promotion in the state of Washington for the next 4 months, according to reports in the Mexican magazines. The current issue of Joe Weider's Flex magazine has a 1952 photo of one of the top bodybuilders of that era who actually achieved a lot more fame in pro wrestling, Pepper Gomez. Billy Anderson has an Empire Wrestling Federation show on April 6th in San Bernardino, California at the Boys and Girls Club. NHB. The WIF pay-per-view show aired on Action Cable on March 15th. We received 16 reports, all thumbs downs, with very negative reactions. The 2-hour show contained about 10 minutes of fighting and 6 matches, with the rest being interviews. Reports are it came off as bad territorial pro wrestling from another generation. No surprise, since one of the announcers was Gene LaBelle, who was just about the worst pro wrestling announcer in the world 30 years ago, when the standard for pro wrestling announcers was a lot lower than it is today, and he was doing his pro wrestling shtick with the only difference being a great deal of added senility. His one funny line that he kept repeating is that he told Oleg Toktarov he was going to cut back on his vodka intake if he lost the fight, which I guess was to explain Toktarov's quick squash win. Among those on the show doing interviews were Mark Coleman, talking for Tom Erickson, who was on this show, and for Kevin Randleman, who will be on the next show, Bob and Frank Shamrock and Tony Halme. They talked up their 3-month-long tournament, which as a concept, is a very sound one because fighters only have to fight once per night and thus matches aren't as likely to be messed up due to earlier injuries. But they showed no bracketing, and one fighter, Halme, is already in serious negotiations with UFC, so I don't think he's even going to be on the next show, whenever it is. They also talked about the winner of the tournament being in line to win $700,000, which, in this outfit, seems like it must be in Battle Royal dollars as opposed to the real thing. We've got a report that Ralph Gracie has pulled out of the EFC pay-per-view show due to a claimed back injury. It should be noted his EFC contract expires at the end of the month, although there aren't many avenues to make money at this trade, especially at 165 pounds. Jeff Osborne is running shoot shows on April 4th and April 5th in Evansville, Indiana. The first night is a lightweight tournament under Pancrase rules, and the second night is a no-weight division NHB rules tournament. For more info, call 812-428-4951. A correction from a few weeks back. It was reported here that back on February 1st in France in a kickboxing match that Maurice Smith, EFC/Rings, beat Jerome Le Banner, K1, but the fight aired on Japanese television and the result was Le Banner winning a rather one-sided 5-round decision. Sean McCulley, who was on the January 22nd Rings show and has appeared in NHB shows in the US and Europe as well, will be in the alternates match at the May 30th UFC. There was an AP story that ran on March 18th saying that Mark Schultz wanted to do more UFC events, but the people at Brigham Young University, where he's wrestling coach, thought it wasn't consistent with their teachings. WCW. Tentative lineup for Spring Stampede on April 6th in Tupelo, Mississippi is Kevin Nash and Scott Hall defending the WCW tag titles against the Steiners, Diamond Dallas Page versus Randy Savage in a no DQ match, a Four Corners match with Harlem Heat, Lex Luger and the Giant with the winner to get the next title shot at Hulk Hogan. Public Enemy versus Jeff Jarrett and Steve McMichael, Prince Iaukea defends the TV title against Steven Regal, Rey Mysterio Jr. versus a mystery opponent who I believe will end up being Yuji Nagata under another name, Akira Hokuto defends the WCW Women's title against Medusa, and Dean Malenko defends the U.S. title against Chris Benoit. Nitro on March 17th in Savannah, Georgia drew a sellout 5,413, 4,397 paying $50,857. The show contained mainly very short, uneventful squash matches and a few angles. The only decent match on the show was the opener with Rey Mysterio Jr. pinning Psychosis in a very good 3:47. The main event was Steiners versus Harlem Heat and went 3:17 to a no contest when the entire NWO attacked both teams in the closing angle. Luger and Giant ran in to make the save and ran the NWO off. The show ended up Sting once again coming down from the ceiling, joining up with WCW and pointing his bat at Hogan, who sold the idea that he was being marked great. Arnold Anderson did a semi-shoot interview talking about his upcoming neck operation to fuse 3 vertebrae in his neck and said he'd be back at some point. There is a very real chance he won't be able to return, and they've given serious consideration to making him a television announcer, which he'd probably be very good at. If he can't return, they should also consider him as a manager because he talks great, and of the current crop of managers, most don't fit that description. Page and Savage did another interview. Page tried to climb into the stands after Savage, but Savage and Liz ran away. Ric Flair did an interview healing on Roddy Piper, saying Piper let the team down and was making fun of Piper, talking about not wanting to wrestle to spend time with his family. Even though Raw was a good show and the WCW show was average and uneventful, the momentum continued in the ratings. Don't forget WCW was coming off some mainstream publicity in regards to Rodman from the night before, and that's the type of thing that adds to the casual viewers, and it's casual viewers, and not wrestling fans, that swing the ratings. Nitro did a 3.56 rating and 5.59 share to Raw's 2.36 rating and 3.56 share. Nitro Replay did a 1.5 rating. It's amazing that with all the hype regarding a Bret Sid Cage match for the title, the possible title change being the final Raw before WrestleMania, that the rating was basically the same as it is every week. As far as the story the quarter hours tell, WCW led by more than a full point in every segment but one, which was when WCW had the Dean Malenko versus Scotty Riggs U.S. title match and the Luger and Giant squash win over Knuckles Nelson and T. Ranchula, who I believe is Pittsburgh indie Rob Mays, who formerly worked SMW at Prince Karis, the 3,000-year-old mummy managed by Daryl Van Horn, and it was 3.4 to 2.5 as Raw had the Mexican middies on. The show started with WCW doing a 3.2 for Mysterio Jr. Psychosis against Titans, 1.9 for Road Warriors versus Crush and Savio Vega. After the minis, WWF actually dipped to 2.2 for the Bret Hart beginning of heel turn interview and Sultan squash match. The return of Shawn Michaels interview did a 2.4 against WCW, doing a 3.7 for the NWO interview and Jarrett and McMichael squash. The Vader Smith match, Billy Gunn match and Ken Shamrock angle did a 2.3, while WCW did a 3.4 for a Scott Norton squash. A Steve Austin interview and no doubt largely the beginning of the Bret Sid Cage match pulled WWF to a 2.7 against WCW's 3.8 for Hall and Nash and Benoit squashes. The final segment, Bret vs. Sid Cage match going against the Flair interview and Steiner's Heat match and run-ins, was 3.9 to 2.7 WCW edge. Other weekend numbers saw main event at 1.2, Saturday night at 2.3 and Pro at 1.4. Psychosis was scheduled for the March 10th Nitro to work against Dragon but couldn't get across the border, and finally everything was settled and he returned for the pay-per-view show. Think of how many jobs he saved himself by having all those paperwork problems. Nitro from April 28th to May 19th due to the NBA playoffs will move up 1 hour in starting time, which should wind up with a temporary change in the Monday ratings pattern as WWF will have a second hour going unopposed. The Augs Clash of Champions has been officially cancelled because by that time, TBS will be running a 2-hour weekly live show, which is almost a sure thing now. On Thursday nights head up with shows like Seinfeld and Friends, which is a lot harder competition than Raw. Apparently Roddy Piper's buddy Leighton Morrison is something of an accomplished karate competitor, having placed in several major tournaments in the early 90s, and once getting an article written on him in a martial arts magazine. According to that article, he worked a few WWF TV jobs many years back against the likes of Bulldog and Warlord. WCW house shows are amazingly hot. Nitro on March 24th in Duluth, $75,000, and March 31st in Roanoke, $77,000, are already sold out. Tickets went on sale on March 14th in Philadelphia for the April 14th show, and they did 6,700 tickets and $115,000 on the first day and have already topped 9,000 tickets sold at press time. Ric Flair appeared in Philadelphia to get the ball rolling on first day sales. They really should use Flair more as an ambassador for WCW in doing things like this than in the ring, except for a few special occasions when his shoulder is all healed, as he's more over not wrestling than he would be if he was in the ring every week. The Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue had a brief mention of Hulk Hogan. It was an article about famed sports photographer Walter Hughes. When asked who the worst person to work with on a shooting was, he said Hogan was the worst he ever dealt with. March 15th in Florence, South Carolina drew 4,886, paying $51,673 for the only regular house show of the weekend. Main event was the return of the Dusty Finish that killed the Carolinas, as Luger and Giant apparently beat Hall and Nash for the belts, and the decision was reversed because Giant had hit Nash with the title belt before Hall submitted in the rack. The first Page Savage match saw Page win clean with the Diamond Cutter, which both says how professional Savage is and what kind of a push Page is getting. Reports on the show were negative because most of the results were screw jobs. Mysterio Jr. missed the show. Well, actually he was there, but his luggage with his ring costume and mask didn't, so Malenko's only appearance was doing a run-in, causing Eddie Guerrero to lose via core against Billy Kidman. Rick Steiner also lost via core to Marcus Bagwell. Bischoff and Hogan attended the Bulls-Knicks NBA game on March 9th to shoot promos with Rodman. Bischoff in an NWO t-shirt was visible behind the Knicks bench the entire game. The announcers never once during the game brought up Rodman's wrestling deal. Rick Thielander of the Chicago Sun-Times wrote a column on Rodman that was in the tone you'd expect. He focused it on Harlem Heat being disgusted about the whole Rodman angle. Apparently he was later on a sports roundtable show in Chicago with the other reporters knocking pro wrestling, but while he knocked Rodman, he defended how hard and how seriously the wrestlers worked in the Heat Public Enemy match. Early reports are that Uncensored did a better buy rate than Super Brawl. Next year's Super Brawl will again be in the San Francisco Bay Area, although which arena hasn't been decided upon. Rob Van Dam was at the Nitro in Savannah, Georgia. WWF Raw on March 17th from Syracuse, New York, before 4,737, paying $76,273, was one of the hotter Raws in a while. In particular, the announcers' enthusiasm was way up. They sold both the WrestleMania pay-per-view and the angles at hand great, and the Bret Hart turn was tremendously executed. All the swearing in the last few minutes will no doubt cause controversy, although at press time we hadn't heard any fallout from it. USA must have approved it because there is no way in hell WWF would do that type of thing without USA's approval, although if the Pillman gun angle is any indication, USA will run from it and put the heat on WWF if it gets controversial. The fact USA approved of it was that on the West Coast feed, the show ran without any editing or bleeping of the dirty language. During the Hart turn, Hart said this is bullshit after losing to Sid in the cage match while he threw Vince McMahon to the ground. Vince, the master actor, had a great glare at Hart. Hart said if people were mad at him, tough shit. Sid also used the word shit, and McMahon, after Hart had decked Pat Patterson, called him a no-good son of a bitch. The entire WWF is definitely going for a much rougher edge to it, as last week's Farouk Ahmed Johnson interview saw them use terms like black ass and charcoal color back and forth, renaming the show Raw is War, which really should be named Raw is Run-Ins. How this long run affects things is uncertain, but one would think by appealing to a more hardcore audience that the ratings aren't going to get any better, although arena business and heat at the shows probably will increase. The funny thing is they've removed those parental discretion warnings before the shows, as they've gone to a much more risque product. WWF spent a lot of money over the past week buying radio ads, or USA spent the money, and we're pushing Raw as a show where you'll see people hitting people with chairs and 2x4s every week, basically pushing that as the difference between Raw and Nitro, never mentioned in the ad by name of course. Show opened with a tryout match with Spellbinder from Memphis losing to Aldo Montoya. Spellbinder did the magic gimmick and got a fair crowd reaction. Jerry Lawler then warmed the crowd up. When he did his ECW rants, they got very little response. While there were many noticeable ECW signs, this was the first show where there were also a lot of negative ECW signs to go with the positive, but the crowd response to ECW was minimal. The TV show opened with Road Warriors over Savio Vega and Crush via DQ in 10:09. As the match was going on, Farouk attacked Ahmed Johnson backstage with a nightstick. In the ring, as the Warriors were about to win, Farouk interfered with the stick and the Nation of Domination was beating on the Warriors till Johnson made the save with a 2x4. LeBron took a great bump from the double impact after the match. Considering Warriors and Crush were involved and how much time they were allotted, the match wasn't that bad. Hunter Hearst Helmsley beat Flash Funk in 5:48. Decent short match. Chyna pulled Funk off the top rope at one point and distracted Funk, leading to the pedigree finish. Both beat up on Funk after the match. They aired a clip of New Jersey Governor Christie Whitman signing a bill which they described as a tax bill elimination and then announced because of the tax being eliminated that SummerSlam could take place at the Continental Arena on August 9th. It's actually the bill that abolishes the State Athletic Commission's jurisdiction over pro wrestling in New Jersey, which WWF had been working on doing since 1989. New Jersey also has a tax on pay-per-view revenue from sporting events that take place in New Jersey, which is one of the reasons WWF hasn't run pay-per-view events in New Jersey in several years. Since pro wrestling is no longer under the commission, the tax is no longer there. Mascarada Sagrada Jr. and Mini Goldust beat Mini Vader and Mini Mankind in 2:57. After the match, Sagrada Jr. did a running dive off the stage onto Mini Vader for a big crowd pop. Crowd really seemed into these guys and the work was good, but it was too short, no pun intended. Bret Hart did an interview and the fans already picked up on the beginning of the heel turn from last week since he was booed as much as cheered coming out. Sultan beat Mike Bell with a camel clutch and had a stare down with Rocky Maivia. Tony Atlas came out of the crowd to hold Rocky back. It sure seems they are building toward Atlas screwing Rocky out of the title. Shawn Michaels returned doing an interview saying he expected to be back wrestling in a few months and said he'd be at the Slammies and he'd do color for the title match at Mania. He got mainly cheers and few boos. Davey Boy Smith beat Vader via DQ in 8:44 when Mankind interfered and Owen made the save in an average match. Billy Gunn beat Aaron Ferguson by submission. Ken Shamrock, who got a better pop than last week, was doing commentary and Gunn challenged him. Shamrock got in the ring and made Gunn tap to a Wakigatami and to an ankle lock in about 5 seconds each. Fans didn't react to tapping out as a submission, so the segment didn't get over live as much as it should have. McMahon was selling this one for all it was worth, trying to get Shamrock over as something really special. McMahon did a tremendous job here. Bret-Sid cage match as a match was pretty bad, as Sid can't work and Bret was average at best. It was actually one of those Antonio Pena specials where a bad match is saved by all kinds of booking gimmicks. Story here is that Austin wanted Bret to win and Undertaker wanted Sid to win, so their respective match would be the title match. At one point Sid was about to get out, but Austin closed the door, not letting him out. Sid then power-bombed Hart and tried to climb out, but Austin climbed up and the two began slugging it out on top of the cage until Hart recovered. The two were double-teaming Sid until Undertaker came out. As Bret had almost climbed out, Undertaker climbed up and got him back in the ring. Hart superplexed Sid off the top rope and Austin hit Undertaker with a chair. Bret tried to go out the door, but Undertaker recovered and tried to slam the cage door on his head, although that isn't really what happened, but it's what was supposed to happen, and while this was going on, Sid recovered and climbed over the top to win in 10:56. After the match was a several-minute-long wild four-way brawl with Michaels coming out and teasing involvement as well, but not actually getting involved. Austin was pretty much portrayed as the face and Hart the heel for their Mania match. For Shotgun Challenge, which is now the same show except Jim Ross and Brian Pillman do the announcing for Shotgun and Kevin Kelly and Jim Cornette announced Challenge, Goldust, who got no reaction, beat Tony DeVito. They interviewed Hart and Smith, who continued their gimmick of each saying they're the captain of the team. Hart said that the two of them are family since Davey Boy married into his family, and he has to live with it. Mascarada Sagrada Jr. got a big pop and beat Mini Mankind in a good match, and did something described as a corkscrew Asai moonsault. Blackjack Bradshaw no contest Henry Godwin in a match with no heat which saw headbangers, Barry Windham, Phineas and Doug Furness and Phil LaFon all get involved. Crowd didn't react to the 8-way brawl either. Final match was dark with Undertaker and Goldust and Johnson over Farouk and Vega and Crush. On the March 10th non-Raw matches from Worcester, Massachusetts, Bart Gunn beat Sal Sincere in a warm-up dark match. Shotgun matches had Furness and LaFon double count-out headbangers. Not as good as you'd think, Hector Garza pinned Heavy Metal. Helmsley beat Bob Holly and Funk beat Bert Centeno. Sonny's gossip thing consisted of material like Ahmed Johnson is actually the illegitimate son of Arnold Scotland and Juanita Wright, Sapphire's real name. She said that Shamrock had been training with Tom Pritchard, who used to be Zip and was writing poems and sending gold roses to someone, etc. in dark matches. Taker beat Farouk in 116 via DQ and Sid beat Brett in the cage match. Brett got a lot of boos in the match, so people reacted as they expected to his crybaby interview. Superstars is now a show that reviews all the angles of the previous week. Weekend ratings saw blast off at 0.9, which must be its record. Ratings are way up probably because of Mania being in Chicago, Livewire at 1.3 and Superstars at 1.5. I can't imagine Superstars maintaining its ratings with the current format. The video box for WrestleMania is built around Undertaker and the number 13, so if you look at the box, Undertaker was definitely winning the title when the concept for the box was put together. The next In Your House after Mania on April 20th from Rochester, New York is tentatively scheduled as Undertaker vs. Vader. Vader now has 3 wins over Undertaker, at Royal Rumble, at MSG on March 16th, and in the tag match on the March 10th Raw, which presumably would be a title match. Johnson vs. Farouk and Crush and Vega 1-on-3, Hart and Smith defend against Road Warriors. Goldust and Marlena vs. Helmsley and Chyna and Jesse James doing a job for whomever the protege of Honky Tonk Man turns out to be. James had been out of action as he was suspended for 6 weeks, one of those notorious company policy violations. Jake Roberts was fired. 2 weeks back he took a rental car while on the Texas-Louisiana tour and disappeared for 2 days, including missing a shot. It was just a few weeks back when he was fired, but then rehired the next day for something similar. I guess his 9 lives were up this time. He'd been working in the office helping write television besides working as an occasional in-ring performer when needed. With Mark Marrow out of action, on TV they hinted that Sable was looking for a new protege. Mankind had an MRI done this past week on his bad back. We heard 2 reports, one that he had a herniated disc in his back and it's rather serious. The other from WWF is that it was a sciatic nerve problem. He doesn't need surgery and has 2 weeks off between Mania and the South Africa tour, and they are hopeful the rest will ease the problem, but if not, he'll take time off after the South Africa tour. Report we've got is that Miguel Perez signed a $150,000 per year deal. Victor Quiñones signed a contract with Titan to help book them into Puerto Rico. Quiñones had a verbal deal with WCW for something similar, but it fell apart due to lack of interest, which also explains why Perez wound up with Titan. As of March 18th, they had 14,568 tickets for $743,520 sold for WrestleMania at the Rosemont Horizon. With most of the talent in Chicago all week, it's considered a given that they will sell out. Bruce Pritchard called UFC up trying to get the rights to use Ken Shamrock UFC footage on WWF television. March 16th at Madison Square Garden drew 8,513, paying $184,584, which is well below average for MSG, as Sultan beat Funk in a decent opener, Blackjacks beat Godwins, Crush beat Montoya, Johnson beat Vega via DQ with the Nation of Domination run-in, Hart and Smith beat Furnace and LaFon in a pretty good match, Helmsley beat Maivia via DQ when Chyna interfered and Helmsley used the pedigree, but Goldust ran in for the title-saving DQ. Not much of a match. Farouk beat Goldust in a dud. Vader beat Undertaker in the casket match when Taker used the tombstone, but when he opened the casket, Mankind was in it and he attacked Undertaker and the two put Undertaker in the casket. After Vader left, Undertaker got out of the casket and destroyed Mankind and put him back in the casket. Sid beat Brett in the cage match with the same finish as all their house show matches, where Brett was climbing over and Sid going for the door at the same time and Sid hit the floor first. Next MSG is May 17th. 1998 Royal Rumble is tentatively planned for Landover, MD. Other weekend houses saw March 14th in Louisville do $4,375 and $69,372, which is good for that city, and March 15th in Landover, Maryland drew $4,429 and $78,178, which isn't good for that city. There may have been plans for a few days last week for Brett to beat Sid, turn heel, and defend against Austin. But if that was the case, obviously those plans changed. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 95009-1228, March 24, 1997. I hope you enjoyed this program. Please like and subscribe. Comments help the algorithm. See you next time.